Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 362. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about jungles and sloths and turtles as we go to the Guianas, the three South American countries of French Guiana, Guyana, and Suriname.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the show, I have one favor and two news stories for you. Let's start with a favor. I'd like to be able to sell sponsorships on the podcast, and my hosting provider Libsyn would like to help. But first, they need some demographics, and so I need at least 250 responses to a survey that you can find at amateurtraveler.com/survey. So if you could help me out with that, I would really appreciate it. The second news story, if you're a married couple above childbearing age and you would like to travel to Mars, there's a tycoon that wants to send a married couple on a flyby trip of Mars. Fly to Mars, look around from orbit, and then fly back to Earth, hopefully safely, and it's all privately funded. The second news story, in an interesting move towards globalization, Starwood, the hotel chain, for the month of March is moving its world headquarters to Dubai, just to get themselves to think differently. For links to both those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Marcello from wanderingtrader.com, who has come to talk to us about three countries in South America, and we're going to collectively call them the Guianas. Marcello, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
And I'm using the term collectively that we're calling them the Guianas. Not all three of them are still named by that, but what three countries are we talking about?
It's the three countries on the top right corner of South America between Venezuela and Brazil. It's British Guyana, which is known as Guyana, or Guyana. It is Suriname, which is known as Dutch Guiana, and then French Guyana, which technically is still a territory under France. It's not its own country.
And all three of these being colonies originally from those three countries. Why should we go to this less traveled part of South America?
I wouldn't necessarily recommend all of them, but if you're the kind of person that wants to see something that's very different and very unique, each individual country has some things that I think everybody would really, really love, specifically Suriname. I think Suriname is one of my favorite countries.
Okay. And what order shall we tackle these in?
I guess we can just go one by one. The way that I visited them was Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana.
Okay. Where do we start and what do we see? French Guiana.
The first thing I think everybody needs to know that the logistics to get to these countries is pretty difficult. And as long as you're trying to go from one to the other. If you're trying to get there directly, just to give you an example, it's easier, at least at the time that I went about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it's easier to find a flight directly to French Guiana from Paris than it is, for example, from Miami.
So they've maintained a lot of the French ties, but not so much the local ties in the region.
If you try to find a flight from Miami, for example, or even from one of the other Guianas, there's always a connection. And a lot of times what the French airlines will do is they'll have 7 or 8 connections with every French island in the Caribbean.
Okay. That sounds like that would take a little while.
The unique thing to see in French Guiana would be the sea turtles. From the entire coastline, you can pretty much just walk to the beach and during the right time of year see the sea turtles just come and lay their eggs. That would be the main thing I would recommend people go to see. The other thing is really big is the 3 islands that surround French Guiana: Royal Island, St. Joseph, and Devil's Island. But this is kind of just for the afternoon if you want to go swimming. Devil's Island has a lot of history in terms of France. They had a prison there. But ironically, they don't let you on Devil's Island. They only let you on the other 2. It's a real big cruise destination. And then obviously there's 2 other things that I thought was unique. One of them is the shuttle.
Space agency, right?
Have a center there for that. So if you're interested in that, obviously you can go see that.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's as impressive as the one in Florida, but it's something to see. The departure point for Devil's Island is actually where the city is, where you go to see the shuttle.
Okay. And then I'm going to recommend that if people don't know Devil's Island, they rent the movie or pick it up on Netflix, Papillon with Steve McQueen, that talks about a experience of somebody on Devil's Island who doesn't want to be on Devil's Island.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really kind of fluid throughout all 3 countries is basically they're all mostly 60, 70, even some of them 90% forest pretty much. So across all 3 of the Guyanas, you can pretty much get a great taste of the Amazon. The only problem is obviously is infrastructure. French Guiana, being part of France, obviously is the most developed. And they have this unique, I'll give you the name, I looked it up for you, Chris. It's called the Iwokrama, Iwokrama. It's a canopy walkway, like they have in Costa Rica. If I'm not mistaken, they actually called on the Costa Ricans to build this. But those 3 things would be probably what you need to see in French Guiana.
And you mentioned the sea turtles and a specific time of year. I'm going to guess late in the year, around November, but what time of year is that with the sea turtles in that area?
June, I would say.
Okay.
June to July. That's already getting a little bit later into the season.
Okay. Anything else we want to cover in Guyana?
Most part, that's it. One of the things that I found fascinating is they tried to live the French lifestyle. If heat and humidity were invented in India, the second place it was invented, it was probably that region. So it's really funny how they have these cafes and it's 40 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside with humidity, and people try to have like the French lifestyle. A few things to see in the city of Cayenne, but for the most part, those highlights are what people should see in French Guiana.
And what surprised you about Guyana?
How developed it was.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, from going from one to the other, for example, Guyana to French Guiana, you'll see that it gets even more developed as you go on. And then if you go backwards from French Guiana to Guyana, as some people call it, you'll see how it gets less developed. And obviously it's because the French control the French Guiana, Suriname. They've been independent, I think, only since the 60s or 70s. Don't quote me on that. And then Guyana, obviously, they're kind of backwards in terms of things working and things like that.
Okay. So let's move on to our next country then. How did you get from one to the other?
Well, I arrived in Guyana, and then I basically went by land, and then I took a flight from French Guyana to Miami. So going from one place to the other, you have to take a boat. And think of it as just a tiny little canoe boat that's literally no wider than a person. And you just hop on. Somebody walks you to the customs agency, which is just a tore down kind of building. If someone didn't show you where it was, you wouldn't be able to find it. And then that's it. And then you find transport to go on the other side. French Guiana, for the most part, they have taxis that are waiting there. They charge people $50, if I'm not mistaken, to go from the coast to the capital. Whereas when I was in Suriname and Guyana, there's like a tour company that I used, and they just picked you up there and they took you around and then they dropped you off. There's no bridges. Everybody has to take a boat across.
Okay.
For the most part, safety in French Guiana you don't have to worry about. One of the negative aspects of visiting French Guiana is how the locals are treated. I found the locals to be treated with a bit of repression because obviously most of the policemen are from France and they don't take kindly to the locals, I guess you can say. That's one of the things I really didn't like at all.
And since we're going to get in trouble for this, can you be more specific what you saw that led you to that conclusion?
Well, every time we had a tour guide from Suriname that was taking us around, and we went to the border city of French Guiana. And as we were walking around, you could see the local police in French Guiana, which for the most part are people from France, that just harassing the locals just for no reason and calling them derogatory names that really isn't necessary. Just out of nowhere. We're just minding our business, probably 7 or 8 tourists just walking, and then this one tour guide, and then they just start harassing them just out of nowhere. It was really blatant, and I mean, that's one of the things I didn't like. And I spoke to some locals, and it's actually easier for the locals of French Guiana to go from Suriname to the Netherlands, take a train to Paris, rather than take a direct flight from French Guiana to Paris.
So even though there is a flight to Paris, it's cheaper. Okay. So let's get back to Suriname.
Suriname, to me, is one of the most fascinating countries that I've been to. Whenever you go somewhere, I think experiencing a country is as much about the tourist attractions as it is the people. And there is a unique blend of people in Suriname that you wouldn't expect anywhere else in the world. Paramaribo, which is the capital, has real unique architecture. I mean, just stuff that you wouldn't expect seeing. Hindu temples, they have mosques, Christian churches, a Jewish synagogue. And if I'm not mistaken, I still haven't been able to find anyone to prove me wrong, but in Paramaribo, it's the only place in the world that has a Jewish synagogue and a Muslim mosque sitting right next to each other, literally right next to each other. Whereas if you go to places like Jerusalem or Istanbul, for example, they're near each other, like on the same block maybe, but not right next to each other. And so the unique blend of the Dutch, the Indonesians, the Indians, the Africans, the Caribbean culture, it creates such a unique blend of people and culture. And I just found that absolutely fascinating. I mean, you can see it as you walk around in the architecture.
And when you say you can see it in the architecture, so you're seeing, if I went up to some of the Dutch islands, Aruba or Curacao, I see a very Dutch influence in the architecture. So here I'm seeing some of that, but also what?
Different flares of, for example, Hindu temples. One situation that was funny in French Guiana is when I walked into a Chinese restaurant, if you think about it kind of analytically, there was a Chinese person speaking Spanish in South America, you know what I mean? So you wouldn't necessarily expect in a place like Suriname to have a Muslim population or even anything in terms of Hindu architecture or anything like that.
Okay.
The tourist attractions there in Suriname, the country is laid out very similar to French Guiana and Guyana. Obviously, everybody lives on the coast. 80-90% of the country is all forest. They have a unique reservation. Obviously, all 3 countries have national forests that you can go to. But Suriname has a reserve that's called the Galibi Nature Reserve. And what they do is they take you on a boat, because you can't get there by car. You board on the border where you would go from Suriname to French Guiana, and you go up the river to where the reserve is. And what it is essentially just an outdoor zoo. So you can play with sloths. You can have a spider the size of your hand, literally just playing with it, snakes.
Can I not have a spider the size of my hand and play with it?
It was dangerous. I don't think it was venomous or anything, but I mean, just to have that experience where you're just walking and everything's just running around and the monkeys are jumping on you. It was a really, really unique experience. And then outside of that, obviously, I found the people in Suriname to be the nicest, the most open in terms of culture and curiosity and things.
Okay. What surprised you about Suriname?
That blend, the diversity.
Okay.
I haven't been in too many places around the world where you find such diversity. Toronto, for example, would be one of them. It's really hard to explain. For example, New York City or London they're really diverse populations. In New York City, and the United States too, for the most part, everybody kind of sticks to their own culture.
Okay.
London, I would say, is a little bit different. Toronto, however, people just blend together. And Suriname is like that, where you have so many people from different cultures who are all Surinamese now, different religions, and they're all just blending together in one place, and it's really, really fascinating to see.
Okay. What else should we talk about with Suriname? Did you see any other places that stand out for you?
I saw Paramaribo. I saw the Galibi Nature Reserve. They'll tell you that the sea turtles are in Suriname. In reality, they're in French Guiana. So make sure they don't fool you. They'll just take a boat ride in the middle of the night over to French Guiana to see the turtles. But I think for the most part in Suriname, that would be it. There's a fort called Fort Zeelandia. And then obviously there's a lot of outdoor things you can do, like go to a reserve or go up the river into the jungle, that kind of thing.
And I'm guessing Fort Zeelandia from the name is a fort that protected it at the coast.
Right.
Okay.
It's in Paramaribo, yeah. It was built by the British, if I'm not mistaken. But I think for the most part, Suriname would be Paramaribo and then that Galibi Nature Reserve. That's what I remember most. And then obviously getting to know the culture.
Okay. And then our final country.
Guiana, or Guyana, as some people call it. There's two really unique things outside of the norm of what you can find across all three countries, Amazon and the beaches and things like that. There are a set of falls called the Kaichur Falls, Kaieteur, Kaichur Falls. And there's a really unique picture that you can take on the set of the falls where there's just one rock ledge standing out and then the falls. So literally it looks like you're almost kind of standing in the middle of the falls. Really, really impressive. Normally you have to take a small 7-8 person plane, and they normally go to another location called the Oranduke Falls. If anyone does go to the Oranduke Falls, I'm going to highly recommend that you bring either 2 shirts or a lot of repellent, because they have these bugs that bite through clothing. The way I describe them, I forget the name, but the way I describe them, they're literally mosquitoes on steroids. And they leave welts on your skin, not like a little bite, and they bite through clothing. So obviously but more the Kaichur Falls. I just wanted to tell you that about the bugs, because I think people should know that. And then the other thing, there's a woman that has an otter nursery towards the northern part of the coast.
Okay. Sea otters or?
Yeah, sea otters, yes.
Okay.
So that would definitely be something that I would recommend people seeing. It's a little bit out of the way, but that's one of the unique things about Guyana. Now, one thing I do want to let people know is, for the most part, you don't have to worry of safety or being dangerous or anything in Suriname or French Guiana, especially French Guiana. But Guyana is extremely dangerous. I'm the kind of person, I've been to South Sudan and Somaliland and things like that. But you be very careful if you're going to Guyana, especially the capital, because obviously tourists, they stick out like a sore thumb. So be very careful if you're heading out. If you're going to go out, even to the market in the middle of the day, make sure you go with a tour guide or a local to make sure that you're safe.
Okay. And this is something your tour guide warned you about when you were there?
Yeah, not only that, but also a few of the locals. It's pretty bad. I mean, there's a lot of corruption. The city of the capital of Guyana, which is Georgetown, if I'm not mistaken, they used to be called the Garden City, and now people call it the Garbage City because things are kind of that bad. But that's one place I'd recommend people just kind of keep an extra eye out if you're going to go to the capital.
Okay. Whole trip, best day you had?
Best day I had, the sea turtles.
Okay.
I took a tour. I went to the Galibi Nature Reserve, and then they took us over to the French Guiana side at, I want to say 3 in the morning to see the turtles lay their eggs. And when I got to French Guiana, I ended up renting a car. And I went to the beach where they give you a tourist map. There's a beach about, I want to say, 20 minutes south of the capital of Cayenne. And it's just amazing to see these creatures that are the size of a dining table walk up to the beach and just ignore you. You're right there. They'll kind of just walk right in front of you. Absolutely incredible. And then after that, I'd say it's probably the Galibi Nature Reserve. Being able to interact with all those animals is very unique.
So you were there when the turtles were coming up to shore and laying the eggs, because there's the other event, which is later on when millions of sea turtles are heading the other direction, millions of tiny sea turtles. I know in Costa Rica, the Arrambide, I think is the name of that. But that, I think, is the other thing that would be obviously later in the year that is also equally spectacular from what I have heard.
Used to go back to French Guiana.
Yeah. You're standing in the prettiest spot in all three countries. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
Suriname. I'd say Suriname by far. Probably just in the middle of the city. Well, it's a little bit different in terms of what people like. Some people are city people. Some people are country people. I would have to say that the Kaieteur Falls, if you're a nature person, is extremely impressive. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're a city person, I think Suriname, with that blend of diversity and being able to see kind of that contrast in the architecture and the people, I would say that the capital, Paramaribo.
Okay. Language. So as you cross the border, the language changes 3 times.
Yes, and not a lot of people speak English. For the most part, I think a lot of people are familiar with Guyana because there's so many immigrants to the States. Because they speak English, obviously, the culture in Guyana is very Caribbean. Their accent sounds like they're from Trinidad or Jamaica. But for the most part, they speak English. Whereas Suriname and French Guiana, all 3 countries are very, very connected very closely to their home countries, Guyana being Britain, Suriname, the Netherlands, French Guiana, France. So when you get to Suriname, for the most part, very, very few people speak English in Suriname or French Guiana. I got by in French Guiana with my broken French, but it was a task in Suriname to get around until you found the tour guide or somebody that kind of understood you. But other than that, I think if Guyana was the place where people didn't understand you, I would say be careful because it can get pretty hairy in Guyana. But in Suriname and French Guiana, the way the culture is and the safety, I don't think it's an issue at all.
One local who made an impression on you?
There was a woman that worked at a rent-a-car, and it was in French Guiana when I rented the car. She was from Suriname working in French Guiana, and she's the one that started to shed a little bit of light in terms of how things work. A lot of people from French Guiana, since they're on the Euro, they'll go to Suriname. And then, don't quote me on this, but she's the one that told me where in France, obviously it's more of a socialist economy, and they can basically live off just what the government gives them, and they don't necessarily have to work per se. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll just work in French Guiana, or they'll just be there for a while, and then they'll hop over to Suriname and buy property. She's the person, I still remember her. I have her as a friend on Facebook, but she's the one that kind of shed a lot of light in terms of how things work in between the countries and things. But I would say her for sure.
So if people have problems with your description of that, they should take it up with her, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Probably doesn't know French Guiana that well. One other person I'd have to say was a woman named Susan in Guyana at the hotel that I stayed at. She was the manager there. She was fantastic, being able to kind of take you off the beaten track, so to speak. The nightlife, being able to take you where the people are at, or if there's like a local hangout at the beach, she was a lot of fun as well.
One thing for each country, so 3 things, that makes you laugh, and say only in Suriname, only in French Guiana.
Suriname, they don't like it when you sit on the table. So when I was at the Galibi Nature Reserve, I just kind of leaned over, not full kind of jump on the table, feet are off the ground, but just leaning on the table.
And you're at a nature reserve, so we're talking like picnic table, rustic sort of thing.
Yes. So I would lean over, and the second I touched the table, everybody just went crazy. And I couldn't understand what was happening. And that's just one of those funny things in Suriname where you just sit on the table. It's disrespectful. In Guyana, it would have to say getting the visa for Suriname. Obviously, the English are very formal, and that carries over a lot into Guyana. So being that it's 150% humidity, you walk outside, you automatically feel it. I'm in a T-shirt and shorts and sneakers. And they didn't want to give me a visa because I had shorts on. They wanted me to wear jeans. I was coming from Colombia. I was living in Colombia at the time. And normally the way I travel is I rent an apartment of where I'm living, And then if I travel somewhere, I just take my backpack.
Okay.
That was a really awkward situation. French Guiana, I think it would have to be the way that they want you to behave around the turtles.
Okay.
One of the things that people have to be careful with the sea turtles is the light. If you shine the light, for example, flash on their eyes, they get dizzy and they don't know where they're going. So when I was at the Galibi Nature Reserve on the tour and they took us to French Guiana in the middle of the night, they were very diligent and adamant about not flashing the light in the turtle's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was really ironic when they didn't want us to do that, but then a researcher comes along and starts poking the turtle, getting blood out, starts measuring them and moving them around or trying to move them around to measure them. So that's one funny situation that happened in French Guiana.
Okay. Before we start wrapping up, anything that we should know before we repeat your trip and go down to all three countries or any of the three countries?
The safety in Guyana obviously would be something I want people to make sure they think about.
Mm-hmm.
The logistics of getting around, because it's smart to be able to do all three while you're there, right? I think you could probably do all three in 2 weeks if you were really pushing it. I think I spent about 3.5 weeks total throughout all three countries. But if you're already going to go there to be there, you should probably try to get through all three. So make sure that you plan the logistics in terms of getting from one country to the other before you go.
Okay.
If you fly into French Guiana and you're going to go to Guyana, for example, from what I remember, the same airline isn't going to fly you back because obviously they have connections and things. So just that would be one of the main things that I would want people to think about. And then I would specifically recommend not to miss the turtles. I mean, that's probably one of the most amazing things I've seen traveling around the world for the last few years.
Excellent. Last two questions. You really know you're in, and we're going to do this by country, you really know you're in French Guiana, in Suriname, in Guyana, when what?
You really know you're in Guyana when you feel the Caribbean kind of flavor, I guess you would say.
Okay. How can I tell that there's a Caribbean flavor? Am I tasting it? Am I hearing it?
It's the culture. It's the way people speak. It's the way people approach you.
Okay.
I think that kind of is very unique to the Caribbean, especially their accent. Obviously, nowhere else in South America are you going to find that other than Guyana.
Okay.
I would say you know you're in French Guiana when you see how sophisticated things are. I would say in all of South America, that's probably the most advanced country.
And when you say sophisticated?
Probably developed.
Okay.
Everything in French Guiana works perfectly. Electricity, roads, everything. I would say, if you're in South America, you're in French Guiana when you see things that are as developed as in the West.
Okay.
You're in Suriname when you can't sit on tables.
Okay. And if you had to summarize Guianas, one word per country, what word would you use for each one?
Well, French Guiana, I would say turtles.
Okay. Thought that might be coming. Okay.
The one word to describe Suriname. Are you going to let me say diversity?
I knew it was coming. Yep. Okay. And then lastly.
Guyana, I'd say Caribbean.
Okay.
I mean, you literally could go to Guyana and feel like you're in Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can people read more about your travels?
I have the travel blog wanderingtrader.com.
And when we say wanderingtrader.com, you actually do wander around, and you're not trying to live off your travel blog. You live off of trading. And when we say trading, not in trinkets, but in stocks.
Right. Yeah, I day trade in the stock market. So the idea initially for the travel blog was to talk about traveling and day trading. So on Wandering Trader, it's more about traveling and living overseas. And then I have another, I guess you can say, blog/company called The Day Trading Academy, where I teach people how to day trade in the stock market.
Okay.
And I've had quite a few people from kind of the travel realm get into the day trading. So that's pretty cool. I guess what I try to do is fuse both.
Okay, excellent. And I don't want to say that while we are letting you mention that is not a recommendation that day trading is a good way to make a living. I will let you decide that or not. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Marcello, for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about this corner of South America that most people have not been to.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And now that we're done with the show, I do want to remind you again about that demographic survey. As soon as we get 250 people, I can stop mentioning it. But that survey again is amateurtraveler.com/survey. We had some great feedback on last week's episode on North Korea. At least a couple of people really didn't feel right about going to North Korea and supporting that regime there, and I certainly understand that and expected that kind of feedback. We also heard from Brad, who said, beside the State of Mind video, there's a couple of other North Korean documentaries I've seen, and he gave us a link, which I'll put in the show notes, for documentaries to watch. The one that stuck out for me was the Vice Guide to North Korea, but I also had mixed emotions about it. It did come off as being very disrespectful, but fascinating. Also, in many of episodes, many of the answers to your standard question of you know you're in blank when what could be applied to many other places in the same geographic area. This is one episode where it was perfectly clear that you knew you were in North Korea. Thanks, Brad. And Brad did not want me to use his last name just in case he wants to go to North Korea. Andrew was asking about support for the iTunes Enhanced podcast in iTunes because they have made it hard to find. If you subscribe to the iTunes Enhanced version and you want to see the chapters and the images that we've chosen for this particular episode, you need to go into iTunes, and way at the top while you're playing the episode, it has a little tiny icon that is a picture of the cover art for this episode. If you click on that, it will expand and you'll see all of the pictures as well as the controls for the episode. Wasn't obvious to me. Maybe you'd already figured it out. Joe sent feedback on the London episode. Just wanted to say how much I enjoyed both parts of the London show. As a frequent visitor to London, I thought the guest was spot on with all her information. In January, I took my 10-year-old son to London for his first visit. We ate several meals at Pizza Express after downloading coupons which were recommended by the guest. It's those kind of kernels of information that are so valuable that you can't find on other travel podcasts. Joe, thanks for the vote of confidence. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have questions, feel free to leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. Join the discussion on the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler, or follow me on Twitter at Chris2X or Amateur Traveler. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more